Hello, everybody. So, again, we'll wait, give it a few minutes here, 2 more minutes, and then we'll get started. Seems like a lot of folks might be out today on vacation, having breaks, spring breaks in the US. All right, it's 5 after, so why don't we go ahead and get going? Um, Thank you all for joining today. Just to review a couple of notes. If you're here, please sign in on that doc. The attendance doc's just kind of nice to keep track. If you can, you don't have to, of course, not required. And another thing, this meeting is recorded and we'll be posting back on YouTube for folks to look at asynchronously if they want to. And then today's topics, or from last week, we went over kind of the basic data types again, discussed what we wanted to support. The biggest question was really around whether or not we didn't want to include the binary data type, binary strings or byte arrays, and we kind of talked about how some folks didn't want to support that. I went to start removing it, but then went back to this aspect and the logs, and that OTel already supports the binary format. So maybe we don't have to actually include operations on those, but we should probably support it for serialization, deserialization so far. So I went back to the context document and added a note there that we probably won't include any operators or functions on top of that data type initially. We'll just include it for CERDES only. So, does anyone have thoughts on that? Pros, cons? Should be okay, I hope. And then eventually we'll have to add some operators on it, I think. All right. And then we did kind of touch on attributes, but this is a major part of the specification. So, I did want to revisit it today and kind of go over what we should try to support as a group. So attributes, just to review what it is, the attributes are the key values that we associate with all of our telemetry types already. So for the most part, almost every observability system has these. So you can call them labels in Prometheus. You can call them tags in Atlas or TSV. You can call them what's the other term? Labels, attributes, tags, dimensions as well. A lot of people will call them the fact dimensions on something like in Druid or Pinot, etc. So in OTel, it has the concept of attributes, of course, that's associated with everything. They do break it down into resource attributes and instrumentation attributes, where the resource reflects the instance that the telemetry is collected from. So in Kubernetes, it's going to be the pod and the pod ID, etc. If you're running on cloud infrastructure, it's going to be the potentially the VM host or whatnot. If it's bare metal, it's going to be the actual host name and attributes associated with that, like the region that it's operating in, etc. And then for the instrumentation resource they have in OTel, it's going to be the library that collected the data, specifically if it's an OTel library. Those things, of course, because OTel is not distributed across the industry completely yet, and there's a lot of history, a lot of observability data that's been written to various systems over the years, and we want to maintain as much compatibility with those as possible. I figured it would make the most sense to flatten this into just a key value pair, and then you have to use semantic conventions to address the resources or the library information if that's present at all, particularly the library bit. So I think flattening this into key value pairs is going to make the most sense across the industry. So does anybody have a thought on that? Any pushback or like trying to adhere more to the OTel standard or do something a little different?
Does the OTel standard dictate the structure of key required key value pairs?
It does.
Okay. Um, I mean, so I can speak for, by the way, hello everybody. I'm Mark. I work at Datadog. I can speak for the Datadog use case or the Datadog sort of scenario. We have a variety of situations where there are key, either keyless values or valueless keys, however you want to see it, basically strings that don't have a colon in them somewhere that are assigned to telemetry. I think this often comes from integrations where, for example, some cloud providers, their resource labeling schemes don't include keys or rather don't include colons. Um, or like, I don't know, to pull a random example, like sometimes they include multiple colons, which is a different challenge. So that would be considered a valueless key in this specification. That's why null is allowed there.
Yep, correct. Yeah, I left that in to model it. I do need to look at OTel again. I don't know if null is specifically allowed or not, but I figured in the vendor, in the semantic standard here, we'd allow that null there, so you could then just have a key with no value. Do you think that would work for your case?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, I think it's one of those things where we allow it, but in practice, there are a variety of features of the product that kind of don't work very well if you're not using key value pairs. And
Mhm.
we sort of let it happen, but don't go out of our way to make it a great user experience.
Okay. Do you have a gut feel as to how many users actually have just labels without values?
So my understanding of the use case is that in many situations, it's because there's some value or some string label that is actually coming from an integration or from a cloud provider, and then that's just being ingested directly. And so I'm sorry, I'm struggling to come up with an example on the spot right now. I think it's sort of integration specific. It is definitely like an extant use case, but it's not like it's not the
Yeah.
sort of the happy path, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, cool. So yeah, I
I'm
think
curious, actually, on that same note, how would we define the semantics of situations where you have a string that has multiple colons in it? The best example I'm thinking of is like a AWS ARN that has, where like the colon is used as a delimiter for subsections of the ARN.
I think so. The idea there would be in that most systems, I believe, is that okay. Thanks, Balaji. Yeah, valueless keys. So traces too. Okay, that's cool.
Oh, good to know.
Yeah, thanks. Okay, so let's add a note. W3C spec. If you have some time, could you link to that in the document, Balaji, please? The section
Yeah,
heading.
absolutely. Yeah, later today I will get a link to it and edit it and things.
Okay, cool. And thank you, Andre. Andrea and Lisa are here from AWS as well to represent. So yeah, we can do that. As far as the delimiters like RNs, ARNs, and such, I was thinking you store those as a string already for the most part, like most systems do. And then if you do need to parse out specific aspects, you can use regular string operators to convert the string into array at query time, and then do any fancy stuff like that if needed. I think for the most part, in my experience, a lot of users will just query for the full ARN, or they'll do a regex match on some aspect of it, if that makes sense. But do you have any special examples? I think you're muted right now, Mark, too, as to where you need to split that out into separate aspects.
Well, so for example, I'm wondering if the spec would define, you know, is the final colon the delimiter between key and value, or is it the first colon in a string that delimits key and value? That
Oh,
makes sense.
in the spec, I wasn't going to have any kind of delimiter like that whatsoever. So it's going to be up to your ingestion pipeline how you want to extract information. So like a
I got it.
Datadog
Okay.
info might do it differently than another one. Yeah, if that
So it
makes sense.
could be that you need to. I guess that raises the next question, which is, are colons allowed as valid characters inside of tag keys?
Yes, I
Okay.
think we would want that to be the case. So going back, yeah, so that kind of brings us back to the key section here. So the OTel spec, and I think the majority of systems allow keys to only have a string value. So we don't want to support other data types like specifically integers or specific double values as a key or something. If you do have that use case of an integer or something, cast it to a string, and then we'll store that as a string there. Keys cannot be null. Did I have that anywhere?
Yeah,
Oh, yes.
first bullet point.
Okay. Thanks. Not null. And then we do, I think, want to stick with the UTF standard because we said before strings are going to be UTF-8 encoded. And it should only contain printable characters. The payload value maybe we'll look at below. It may have binary arrays, etc. But any thoughts on the first three here? Makes sense, I hope. That should be shouldn't be too controversial. The
Yeah.
one that may have some differences across the various systems would be treating the keys as case sensitive. So I'm wondering if anybody has thoughts on that here. I think the majority of systems will treat them as case sensitive. We could probably have operators that will treat them as insensitive if needed. Oh, okay. Sergey says you don't over there. So everything is treated as insensitive, or do you cast everything to a lowercase and then compare?
Just insensitive.
Mhm.
Case insensitive, yes.
Okay. Is that on ingest as well? If you, well, I guess, yeah, that would be the same key just to normalize it.
Yep.
Gotcha. Would there be any issues, do y'all think, if we treated in the spec at least as case sensitive and then various stores were still insensitive in that I assume the data model would cast them to the same value behind the scenes.
I guess that's already a part of a vendor implementation adoption. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Should be fine.
Should be fine. Okay, cool.
I think this is another one of those things that can be affected by the intake side, where if ingest just happens to lowercase all keys, then you're kind of de facto in a case insensitive world.
Mm-hmm. And then, oh, okay. Andrea, sorry.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was curious about Andrea, if he could expand on the reasons CloudWatch for doing the token searching.
Yeah, hi everybody. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, sorry, because I don't see the green thing around my face there. Yeah, hi everybody. Yeah, so there is, for what it's worth, right? So we do have some search capabilities there in CloudWatch that allow customers to do what we call tokenized search. So because like a lot of customers, what they do is like they overuse those key value pair and then they try to stick more information into a single value, right? So, for example, instead of splitting the information into multiple like key value pairs, they do something like team dash department dash service, or they camel case everything. And so to solve the search problem like one thing that we do is like we can't camel case, and so we do like a case sensitive search, because effectively we extrapolate tokens from that string and make them available as they would have done differently, if they were just using the tool appropriately, right? So effectively with the team with the team only, with the service only, although they're together with the same string. Now, I'm not saying it's a good practice; they shouldn't do that. But just wanted to highlight that if you go for example, like transforming everything into camel case, you can lose a little bit of those capabilities for some of the systems that are out there.
Okay, that's interesting. But then at the query time, if somebody's searching, would you actually just lowercase that word, capital WRD, and if they typed in lowercase word, would it still match? Do you kind of do the fuzzy match there?
So maybe a way to think about this is like as if you would be to index you would index the entire string, so the entire value. So let's say service dash department slash dash whatever, and then you would index also the split string all in lowercase. So effectively, adding multiple, like, you decompose the string into multiple string, and then you actually, make that to be searchable. The search in itself, it is case insensitive, at least in our case. But it's the fact that you split based on the customer ingress that makes the not fully case insensitive, right? So effectively is case sensitive on the way in, but case insensitive on the way out, if that makes sense.
Yep, that makes sense. Okay. Interesting. Cool. Yeah, so I guess another aspect of this specification is that we want to make sure that we do whatever is easiest for the end users to understand and interoperate with the semantics here and what makes sense. So I guess the question would be, do you think it makes the most sense from end users' perspective to treat these as case insensitive? Because I assume a lot of users would query and just, they may not know the case sensitivity up front until they get the results back. If they hit a case sensitive system, they would see potentially, if it's in a group by, you'll see the two different time series, and maybe they then have to go back and correct the case. Or if they hit a case insensitive system, regardless of what query they use, it'll result in just the insensitive data. Original data. Any thoughts there?
Both are good points, Chris. You have to kind of, when you're standardizing, look for the common denominator and
Mhm.
not build towards special cases. I can totally imagine also the other point you made, confusion in terms of seeing those differences unexpected and then having to go and merge those things and whatnot. So good to keep it clean. So I support what you're proposing.
Mhm. Thanks. Any other thoughts? Because we can also specify here as a default, I guess, yeah, because this one's tough since we already have differing implementations. Mhm. Cool. Open source, open search supports that. But what would be the default, I guess, for OpenSearch? If you queried and just typed in a string, would it match both upper or lowercase, depending on how the user index the data?
I think they do, yeah.
Which one? Sorry, it would be sensitive or not?
I don't think it's sensitive. I think it's case insensitive.
Insensitive.
I mean, but the look of it, like from the page that I sent it over there, like it seems that they, when you see like becomes, there are a few examples when they see becomes, they actually bring everything into lowercase.
Mm.
It depends on the ingestion metadata mappings or tokenization mappings. We should recommend a defaults, like good defaults over there at ingestion. Like suppose you support ODLP in as a standard way to get data into OpenSearch. That should be linked with a default, and then things over here flow seamlessly. But generally, the default nature is like just match both.
Gotcha. Let's say attributes key. Yeah, and the OTel standard actually specs here. It says keys that differ in casing are treated as distinct keys. So that could be an issue too. That if somebody writes to a case instance system, that you could if somebody did something really weird and had two different cases on the same telemetry object or record, you'd have squashing behavior, indeterminate behavior there. But that is just an edge case. So I wouldn't mind if everybody thinks it would make sense. Maybe we modify this and say that key should be treated or queried case insensitive by default, but a user should be able to make a case sensitive query. Would that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
I have one question just to understand. So
Sure.
if the idea is to allow for vendor neutrality, then if we also did allow implementations that work only on one platform, then how are we actually protecting the users from, or how are we guaranteeing that neutrality is like the goal?
Yeah, that's a good question there, particularly on this one. So I guess the question comes to whether or not we think it makes sense now on the egress side to support the OTel spec as much as possible. Or if we do want to modify it, kind of adjust this aspect of it for end users. What do y'all think?
So, Balaji, can you repeat your question? Like, I think I'm kind of just want to rehear it to get the context correct. Can you come again?
Okay, no problem. So
Yeah.
I also am not an expert on this, which is why I put the question to Chris. If vendor neutrality was one of the goals of designing this language, and let's say we had two modes, basically a default, which conforms to the neutrality, And if so, the user chooses to break it, we allow them to break it. But one wouldn't be cognizant of all of these nitty-gritty details in their writing queries, right? So how would you basically guarantee the neutrality, which is kind of the goal of this project? Basically, any query, you can take it to another system and it will still work.
Yeah, fair. It's fairly difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I could also think of proposals, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I
You
know,
could,
I know.
you could
Yeah.
have a linter and whatnot and say,
Yeah.
do this, it breaks, come back, whatever. But I think if you had to do that, you could do that to any language. You don't need a new language per se. I'll leave it at that. It's a difficult question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a tough one. And I think this is where we have to get in the details and discuss it pretty well. I think that, like in this case, so we have two camps where data may be stored and denormalized into case insensitive data in some systems and case sensitive in others. So if we support case sensitivity, if somebody is migrating from a case insensitive system to case sensitive, that's no problem. That should be fine because the semantics are going to behave the same. Unless we hit that edge case where a user is doing something goofy and they have case sensitive on one side in one system, but case sensitive on another, and they're trying to do a join or expression across those. That is going to break between them. So that's something that I don't know if we can solve easily, but we can at least document and call out during a transition.
Like for a user feature, like what is the user feature? We're like, what is the user sort of nice to have or bar? I think that's like you take a query from one system, copy paste it to another system, and it expects to work the same. So as long as I'm taking this as an example, keys must be treated as case sensitive. That's narrower. So if we define in that form, they should be okay. But
yeah, it's one of those that should, for the most part, be okay. But like you said, yeah, it's gonna bite some people, I think, because they're gonna say, "Oh, well, vendor A did this for me, but now I'm moving to vendor B, who is case sensitive, and all of a sudden my results, I have two groupings, or my results are inflated."
Yeah, but I think to be clear, going ahead, if we are following something to Balaji's point, we need to make sure that we are attempting to be vendor neutral by not making vendor specific choices. But there are some choices that we have to make.
Right. Mm-hmm. And that's where it's, just got to choose something, I think. Okay.
Do we clarify this tenet somewhere of when we create some things, or do we need? Sorry, I'm just don't have too much context.
Oh, sure. Yeah, as far as when we're discussing something and how we address it.
No, as far as when we create a spec, do we have the tenets for the spec clearly written? Things like, so questions that Balaji specifically asked can be addressed or be called out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I've got the goals at the top here, which are going to kind of what we're designing against, the specific aspects. So these are, if you find something in there you want to add or clarify, then we can certainly do that, please.
Okay.
Or anything that's missing, let's add it there, please. But we do definitely want to, aim for as much interoperability as possible, but also we want to make it easier for the users to understand because, again, we have a lot of developers and non-SREs, people who work with observability. They come in for a little bit and then they forget it and they come back. That kind of stuff.
Like the copy paste thing, maybe I'm misreading, but I don't see that in the goals, like ability to have the queries be interrupted between data. Is that the first one? Or
yes, provide standard intermediate, defines similar for currently analyzing. Yeah, I should call it out specifically, but kind of the overarching concept here is that we're semantically compatible between these systems in the query. We don't necessarily need to support copy paste right now, because we have such a variety of DSLs out there that it's going to be really difficult to do. Instead, because things are pretty close semantically, I think across our systems with some slight differences, like the case sensitivity, time
Okay.
windowing, etc., that we should be able to transpile a query from one system to another. So if you have a PROM query and you're going to a SQL-based system or a Custo-based system, you should be able to run it through a compiler, convert it, and get.
Got it. So
You know,
that's more of a migratory use case or transitionary use case, but I'm more aligning to like an SRE who has to work in multi-cloud environments, and he goes to one cloud, a second cloud, a third system, and he can use his knowledge universally.
correct.
Yep. Is there a better way to call it out, or I can add a comment over here later?
Yeah, add a comment there, and then
sure.
we can call it out and describe that. That'd be great.
Thank you.
Sure. And Sergey, did you have a question still, or answered?
No, I think I answered it myself.
Okay, cool. All right, thanks. All right, so on this one, the case sensitivity, I'll add a call out a to do, and then maybe I'll add some information to the context document and then share that around, and we can contribute to that asynchronously and kind of dig in and try to, I don't know, vote on it or something. Kind of a default or a behavior to expect there.
So quick question on this case sensitivity for a key, right? I mean, let's try like thinking about it, how it's expressed in the language. So key is something which is addressed by the user, let's say on the left side of the operation, say equality, right? If the key is case sensitive, I mean, it shouldn't be then the case for entire language then to be case sensitive, because if my keys are case sensitive, then let's say, I don't know, my tables are case sensitive as well, right? Is it the case then? I mean, like then this basically applies to everything, either case sensitive or case insensitive.
Well, that's one of the funny things about observability, I think, in that you may have a system where the keys are insensitive, but then you could have a log line where you treat it as sensitive when you're querying, and you're just doing an unstructured log string, and maybe you want to query that in a way. Or
Just common use cases that I can speak for logs and actions. User, so they always look for case insensitive things. They would never understand what was in there. So the query would say contains insensitive, then search for something.
Oh, well, yes, but this is value already, right? We are talking about the key. So value is on the right side of the operand, let's say equality. Key is on the left side. Let's you say, I don't know, user equal. So user is the key, right? Is basically a DBMS entity column, so to say, right? So this part is then case sensitive or insensitive. But if it's case sensitive, it means that probably all other aspects, entities of database, right, should also be case sensitive functions and stuff like that. You see what I mean? The value for sure, right? I mean, Custo have like different type of operators have case insensitive equality, case sensitive equality for user to be exact. But the actual key, right, is referred as the column name, and it's always case sensitive. So when we say the key is case sensitive, what do we refer here?
Yeah, that's a good point, because we are kind of thinking of it as a column, and same thing with a table. If you're trying to join a metric and a log and a trace, you may have different ephemeral tables, something like that, that would be case sensitive. But then you're right, the value may be case insensitive. So that's a good point, calling it the column. Yeah, Balaji.
Yeah, that may be true of existing systems, but I think that point is far too subtle for users to understand. Like when you're writing a query, I don't think about whether I'm using it on the right-hand side of the expression or left. It's a subtlety, but it has to be learned.
Sure.
Yeah, that's my view on it.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just taking some notes here too. Any other thoughts on this one? users have. But you're right that even though we treat it as a column in some sense, we have that problem still of users who may, if you're instrumenting something in Python, you may have a common tag in your infrastructure. Like in our case, we call it nf.app would be something, and we have it all lowercase by default in our instrumentation, but a user could come along and say capital nf.app for their Rust implementation because we don't officially support it. And we do want to join those, treat them essentially as the same column. So that's where it gets really confusing and sticky here.
So, I mean, and I understand the use case is absolutely legitimate, right? That people will ingest the data with different casing of a keys. But then again, I mean, we need to think about the fact of what do we do with the other aspect of the language, right? Because it would be then confusing to customer, to whoever use the language, to address keys in the case insensitive manner, because it makes sense. But then functions are for some reason case sensitive, right? Or operators are case sensitive. What I'm trying to say is that it seems like it incurs the decision for entire language to maybe be case insensitive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're right. Even the SQL semantics, they're case insensitive, right? You can write your functions
Correct. Yes.
either way. So yeah, I'm definitely open to that. But on that aspect, well, never mind. It does tie into syntax and semantics as well. Yeah, if you have a syntax that was case sensitive, it wouldn't make sense for the semantics to be insensitive. And then same thing with other things. So we probably want to have time to get deep into the models, but one of them would be that if a user is working with a language, with a model directly within SQL itself, you would have to call out something like attributes and then do brackets, quotes, and then the key value within there. But then you have the other fields in SQL in the model, like the type or a value, potentially step and timestamp, etc., that you need to call out specifically as well, and those are also typically case insensitive, right? So that kind of lends then back to the keys probably should be treated as insensitive, and we'd have to square that somehow with the systems that are storing them sensitively, however you want to say it. So I can take a to-do too and follow up with the OTel folks on this as well. Okay. Then we only have about 5 minutes left in the official meeting here, so I do want to get to the values. A lot of systems do have values. They just store them as strings, particularly in the metrics realm. So if you look at Prometheus, they're all essentially strings. But the OTel spec is officially calling it out where you can, at least over the wire, define them as specific data types. So the Boolean string, signed integer, etc. And then various data stores, you can, of course, for optimization, course these into different types for efficiency. So, instead of trying to cache a double into a string, if you're measuring a double as a tag value, you can maintain it as double and take advantage of different delta encoding, et cetera, and stuff like that. Then I did throw in here the JSON type because that's pretty common in tracing and logging, potentially other services profiling, where you may dump a full JSON object into a tag key or an attribute. I keep calling them tags. That's what I've called them for years, so I apologize for that. And then another aspect that crops up pretty often is that you may have a piece of telemetry that's part of, let's say, A/B tests where it falls into various buckets. So this is one that's a perennial issue in the industry where how do you label those? If you have a string only system, do you concatenate those buckets into one string and then regex on them, which is a crummy user experience? Or do you treat them separately and break them up into an array of values, and then you can query over those? I think Druid supports that. I think Datadog supports that, and some others. So these are, maybe we'll probably continue talking about these in the next call, but does anyone have any thoughts right now you want to mention? Balaji?
Just a quick comment. Some languages, some data formats like Parquet allows for complex types. So it would be like lists, maps, among other things. So I know we have an array which conforms to one of those complex types, but if more and more data formats support complex types, we probably need a way to map those complex types out. We still uses a type called dynamic, where it says, hey, I don't know the type of this until at runtime. And that would map to all the complex types, for example, Parquet's data format. So I don't see one here. So it might be something you may want to think a little bit more about. How a type that could represent all the complex types available in a lower level representation, for example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one way to do it. I was thinking in this case, we kind of treat this as a union, right? Like going back to C, C++, all those models, where it's going to be one of these values. So that's kind of like the dynamic type you mentioned there. And then within the data store, it can be one of those types at any point in the record, because you may have one system that emits the double value with quotes, so it becomes a string. But you can add in the implementation of your data store some smarts to say, oh, this is really a double. I'm going to convert it back to a double. Issues like that.
That is correct, but it could also have nested members or
Right.
repeated members, so on and so forth.
Yep. And this is the right, particularly with a JSON type, it's going to be nested. The array type can be nested. But specifically to that, we also want to avoid nesting, indeterminate nesting of values within attributes. So we only want to go down one level, I believe. And folks can correct me if I'm wrong on that aspect.
I can follow up maybe a little later. There is, I think, the W3C spec for tracing it allows for dictionaries to be measured inside dictionaries and so on and so forth. I just need to do a mapping out of how can I represent that.
Okay. So. Yeah. Link it here if you can. And then you can put it in the CNCF Slack channel there, the working group channel, and then we can discuss it there. That'd be a great way to do it, I think. Cool. All right, we're officially at time here, so I'll go ahead and close this out. Any other questions or thoughts before we go? If not, then thank you very much. And remember, sign in if you are able to and interested in, and join the CNCF Slack if we haven't. I'll add the link to these documents to get the invites. A few folks who've been joining lately, they get wind up at a membership page where you have to fork over hundreds of thousands of dollars to the CNCF, and that's obviously not the case. I know a lot of folks are, their parent companies are, but yeah, it's all free, all open. And again, we don't, yeah, this is for everybody to interact with and contribute to. So thank you very much, everyone, and have a great week.
You too. Thank you.
All right, take care.
Bye.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.